Have you ever wondered how different our world would be if World War II had not happened? As we stand in the year 2023, we are far removed from the tumultuous 1930s, a decade that saw nations across the globe grappling with economic depression, political upheaval, and a rising tide of militarism. Picture a world on edge where international diplomacy teetered on a knife's edge, and nations watched each other with wary eyes. The world was a complex web of alliances and antagonisms, a tinderbox waiting for a spark. World War II, the cataclysmic event that would shape the course of the 20th century, was looming on the horizon. But what if it hadn't? What if the spark was never lit? How different would our world look today? These questions, while intriguing, are not just academic exercises. They help us understand the significance of this global conflict. Now travel back in time as we explore the unfolding of the deadliest conflict in human history. Our journey begins on September 1st, 1939, with Hitler's forces storming into Poland. This was the first application of what would become known as Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. A strategy that emphasized speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. It was designed to disorient and destroy the enemy before they could effectively respond. Poland, caught off guard and vastly outmatched, fell in less than a month. The world watched in shock as the German Wehrmacht, with its modern tanks and air power, swept through the Polish countryside, encircling cities and crushing resistance. Yet it wasn't just the speed of the invasion that shocked the world, it was the sheer brutality. Towns were bombed, civilians targeted, and the seeds of the Holocaust planted with the persecution of Poland's Jewish population. The international community was quick to condemn Hitler's aggression. Britain and France, both weary from the scars of the Great War, were nevertheless compelled to act. They had pledged to protect Poland's sovereignty, and Hitler's invasion was a clear violation of this agreement. The leaders of both nations knew that appeasement was no longer an option. On September 3rd, just 2 days after the invasion began, Britain declared war on Germany. France followed suit later that day. The world held its breath as the news spread. It was clear to all that this was not just another conflict, but a war of unprecedented scale. A war that would pit nation against nation, ideology against ideology, and ultimately, humanity against itself. The invasion of Poland was more than just the start of World War II. It was a demonstration of the devastating power of modern warfare, a warning of the horrors to come, and a call to action for nations around the world. But most of all, it was a stark reminder of the human capacity for destruction. This marked the beginning of a war that would span 6 grueling years. The world had once again descended into chaos, and the stage was set for the greatest conflict in human history. By 1940, Hitler's army was marching across Europe, and the Axis powers were expanding. This marked a pivotal moment in the Second World War. Let's rewind a bit. In the spring of 1940, the German Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, made its devastating mark. The German forces swept through the Low Countries, and then, in a shocking twist, they invaded France. The French, despite having one of the largest armies in the world, were ill-prepared for the swift and brutal German tactics. The result was catastrophic. In just 6 weeks, France fell to the Axis powers. As France capitulated across the Channel, Britain braced itself for the inevitable onslaught. This led to the Battle of Britain, a significant conflict fought entirely in the air. The Royal Air Force, although outnumbered, tenaciously defended the skies against the German Luftwaffe. The resilience of the British pilots, coupled with the strategic errors of the German High Command, resulted in a decisive British victory, marking the first major defeat for the Nazis. Meanwhile, the Axis powers were not just expanding in Europe. In the East, Japan, a key player in the Axis alliance, was also on the move. Emboldened by the idea of creating a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, Japan embarked on a series of invasions across East and Southeast Asia. By the end of 1941, they had established control over vast territories, including parts of China, Indochina, and the Pacific Islands. The rapid expansion of the Axis powers during this period was a terrifying demonstration of their military prowess. Yet it's important to remember that this expansion was not unchecked. Resistance was mounting, alliances were strengthening, and the seeds of defiance were being sown. As the Axis powers grew stronger, so did the determination of the Allies. The stage was set for a global struggle, a titanic contest between the forces of aggression and the defenders of freedom. And as we'll see in our next segment, the tide of the war was about to turn. 1942. a year that marked a turning point in the war. The world was embroiled in conflict, a war that was consuming nations and redrawing maps. Yet, this was the year where the direction of the war shifted dramatically. Let's delve into the key events of 1942 that ultimately changed the course of World War II. We begin with the Battle of Stalingrad, a grueling confrontation between the Axis and Soviet forces. Lasting from August 1942 to February 1943, it was one of the deadliest battles in history. The city was a strategic target for Hitler, who hoped to cripple the Soviet Union's industrial capacity and morale. However, the Soviet Union's resistance was unyielding. The harsh winter and relentless Soviet counterattacks eventually led to a catastrophic defeat for the Axis powers. The Battle of Stalingrad marked a significant turning point, signaling the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Simultaneously, on the other side of the world, a pivotal battle was taking place in the Pacific. The Battle of Midway, fought in early June 1942, was a decisive encounter between the United States and Japan. The US, using their superior intelligence and strategy, managed to sink 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, dealing a devastating blow to the Japanese Navy. This victory ended the threat of further Japanese invasion in the Pacific. Meanwhile, the United States was ramping up its involvement in the war. After the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor in late 1941, the US had formally entered the war. By 1942, American factories were churning out war materials at an astonishing rate, supplying not only their own forces but also their allies. This industrial might, combined with the increasing number of American troops on both European and Pacific fronts, was a significant factor in turning the tide of the war. As the year closed, the world saw the first clear signs of a shift. The Axis powers were on the defensive, and the Allies were beginning to push back. The tide of the war was beginning to turn. From 1943 onwards, the Allies fought back, pushing towards victory. As the world watched with bated breath, the Allies began to turn the tide in their favor. Let's begin with D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. This day marked the largest amphibious assault in history, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. It was a daring and dangerous mission, but it was crucial in opening up a second front against Nazi Germany. This was the beginning of the end for the Axis powers in Western Europe, but victory was not yet assured. In December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge erupted. This was Hitler's last major offensive in the West. Despite initial successes, the German forces were ultimately pushed back, spelling the end of any realistic hopes of a German victory in Europe. As the Allies advanced on the Western Front, the Pacific theater was reaching its climax. The island-hopping campaign brought fierce battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, sapping the strength of the Japanese Imperial forces. Then, in August 1945, the world would witness a terrifying new chapter in warfare. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The scale of destruction was unimaginable, and the human cost staggering. These bombings marked a turning point, forcing Japan to surrender. The wheels of war had now ground to a halt. The fight was over. The Allies had pushed back against the Axis powers. They had stood firm in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, and they had emerged victorious. The cost of this victory was immense. Lives were lost, cities were destroyed, and the world was forever changed. But out of the ashes of war, new hope emerged. On September 2, 1945, the war finally came to an end. The stage was set for a new world order, one that would strive to prevent such destruction from ever happening again. And so, as we reflect on the road to victory, we are reminded of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring hope for a peaceful world. The world was left to count the cost of a war that had claimed millions of lives. The aftermath of World War II was a period of profound change and reconstruction. The human cost was staggering, with an estimated 70 to 85 million people perishing, representing approximately 3 to 4% of the world's population. In the wake of this global conflict, the world was confronted with the horrors of the Holocaust. This systematic, state-sponsored genocide orchestrated by Nazi Germany led to the murder of 6 million Jews. The discovery of concentration camps and the scope of the atrocities committed within them shook the world, leading to the Nuremberg trials, where prominent leaders of Nazi Germany were prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The aftermath of the war wasn't solely about reckoning with the past. It was also a time for the survivors to look towards the future. In an attempt to prevent such a devastating conflict from happening again, nations came together to form the United Nations in October 1945. The aim of this international organization was to promote peace, security, and international cooperation. The creation of the United Nations marked a new era of diplomacy and collective security. However, the end of World War II also marked the beginning of a new conflict, the Cold War. With the defeat of the Axis powers, two superpowers emerged, the United States and the Soviet Union. These two nations, with their contrasting ideologies of capitalism and communism, began a tense standoff that would last for nearly half a century. This period was characterized by political and military tension, propaganda, and a race for technological supremacy, but thankfully never escalated into a full-scale war. The aftermath of World War II was a time of reflection, rebuilding, and significant geopolitical shifts. It was a period that witnessed the best and the worst of humanity. From the horrors of the Holocaust to the formation of the United Nations, it's clear to see that World War II had irrevocably changed the world. In the wake of such devastation, one must wonder, could this have been avoided? The echoes of World War II still linger, shaping the world we know today. It was a conflict born from a volatile mix of economic despair, political ambition, and racial ideology. Struggles for power, territorial disputes, and the failures of diplomacy were the kindling that fueled this global firestorm. As we look back, we see the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression and appeasement politics. The world watched as nations were swallowed whole, their people oppressed, their cultures threatened. The cost was high, with millions of lives lost, cities reduced to rubble, and countries torn apart. But from the ashes of destruction, we also see resilience and the indomitable human spirit. We see nations rising again, rebuilding from the ruins, and people putting aside their differences to unite for a common cause. Amidst the darkness, we find glimmers of hope and unity. The lessons of World War II are many. It taught us the value of international cooperation as we saw the formation of global institutions like the United Nations. It showed us the importance of resolving disputes through dialogue and diplomacy, not through violence and war. It reminded us of the dangers of extremism and the need for vigilance to safeguard our freedoms. This war has also shaped our technological landscape. It accelerated advancements in medicine, engineering, and communication technologies. It gave birth to the nuclear age, a double-edged sword that brought about both immense destruction and potential for power generation. However, perhaps the most profound impact is on our collective consciousness. The images of war, the stories of survivors, the monuments and memorials, they all serve as poignant reminders of the horrors of war. They remind us of our shared history, our collective responsibility, and the need for peace. As we remember World War II, we are reminded of the cost of conflict and the value of peace. Let us not forget the lessons of the past as we navigate the complexities of the present and future. Let's strive to build a world where peace prevails, where differences are resolved through dialogue, and where humanity thrives.